The rain lashed against the steel-plated transport van as it wound its way up the cliffs toward Black Ridge Penitentiary, a fortress carved into the bones of a forgotten mountain. Inside, surrounded by armed guards and silence thick as fog, sat Adrian Voss. No hood, no mask. His face was fully visible, and that made the guards more nervous than if he'd worn one. Adrian's eyes were sharp, unblinking, not wild. Worse, calculating. The kind of look that weighed everything in the room like variables in an equation. The shackles on his wrists and ankles didn't seem to bother him. He sat straight-backed, composed, and disturbingly calm, like he chose to be there. One of the younger guards broke the silence. "You don't look like a killer." Adrian tilted his head slightly, smiling just enough to show it wasn't a friendly gesture. "I don't look like a lot of things," he said softly. "That's why I'm good at them." The other guards shifted uncomfortably. Everyone had heard rumors about Voss, some dismissed as paranoia, others too wild to be true. He wasn't just any inmate. He was once a brilliant cryptologist, a former intelligence officer who cracked codes faster than machines. But something went wrong. Very wrong. The government had erased most records about what happened 5 years ago. The official story was vague. Internal sabotage, unauthorized access, attempted exposure of classified operations. But people who knew things, people with badges and hollow eyes, spoke his name in whispers, as if just remembering him carried consequences. The van pulled to a stop at Blackridge's outer gate. The guards stiffened, rifles ready. Adrian remained still. When the heavy doors slid open, floodlights lit the yard like a surgical theater. Steel towers loomed overhead. Blackridge wasn't a prison. It was a tomb built for monsters who couldn't be killed. Warden Elias Graves was waiting. Weathered and cold, the kind of man who'd run hell like a business. "You're Adrian Voss," he said, not as a question. "I've been told," Adrian replied. Graves eyed him. "You know why you're here?" Adrian looked up at the looming prison and smiled faintly. "Because too many people are afraid of what I remember." No one spoke. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the cliffs. Graves nodded to the guards. "Cell D9, solitary. No light, no sound, no contact." One of the guards hesitated. "Sir, that's normally for—" "I said D9. They led Adrian inside, down into the bowels of the prison, past rusted steel doors and flickering lights. As the heavy gates shut behind them, it became clear. They weren't locking Adrian Voss in to protect the world from him. They were locking him in because they couldn't figure out what else to do. And maybe, just maybe, they feared he was right. Because whatever he'd discovered, whatever he'd tried to expose, someone was still trying to bury it. 10 feet by 10. Concrete walls, no windows, a steel door with a single food slot, no mattress, no sink, just a hole in the floor and a light that never turned off. This was where they put Adrian Voss, not to imprison him, but to erase him. For 23 hours a day, he sat in silence. The lights buzzed overhead, humming just loud enough to keep sleep impossible. Every meal came cold, unidentifiable. Every attempt to speak to a guard was ignored. No books, no letters, no legal counsel. The world had locked him away, and then pretended he never existed. Week 1, he counted seconds. He mapped the rhythm of the guard's footsteps, calculated shift changes, tested how long it took the air in the cell to turn stale. His mind remained sharp, focused. Week 2, they took away time. Lights on constantly. No noise, no routine, no sleep. Hours blended together into a fog. He began to hallucinate. Heard footsteps that weren't there. Conversations from the drain. Screams from behind the walls. Still, he endured. Week 3, the torture began. At 2 a.m., though no clocks told him the time, they gassed the cell. Not to kill, just enough to make him vomit, choke, pass out. Then, the guards dragged him to the White Room, a chamber with blinding lights and white noise pumped through every wall. There, he was strapped to a steel chair, electrodes attached to his temples. The doctor never spoke his name, just called him Asset 12. They didn't ask him questions. That was the cruel part. They weren't after information. They were breaking the man who knew too much. When it was over, they'd drag his limp body back to cell D9. Sometimes he woke up midway. Sometimes he didn't wake up for hours. And every time, Warden Graves would visit. He never threatened, never shouted. He just stood behind the glass and said, "You can end this. Just give us the encryption keys." Adrian would smile, blood in his teeth. "I don't think you're ready for what those keys unlock." Graves would nod, as if disappointed in a stubborn student, and walk away. No one was allowed to speak Adrian's name, not on reports, not in conversation. D9 became his identity, not a man, just a designation, like a virus under quarantine. By month 2, he had no contact with the outside world. No trial, no appeal, no file anyone could access. Even the guards didn't know what he had done. They just knew someone wanted him silenced permanently. And that silence had a name: Blackridge. But they made one mistake. They thought isolation would make him weaker. It didn't. It made him ready. Because while they tried to break him, Adrian Voss was doing what he did best: planning, calculating, and waiting for his moment. A senior technician stared at the encrypted file flashing on his terminal. Unauthorized access attempt, traced to cell D9. Technician, alarmed. "That's not possible. He's offline, no connection, no tools." Security chief, over intercom. "Wipe the logs, now before it's seen." But it was too late. Adrian Voss had made contact. Inti cell D9. Earlier that day, no wires, no screen. Just a strip of rusted metal peeled from the wall, and the remains of an old circuit behind the drain. Adrian had been building it silently, bit by bit, mapping the electrical pulses of the prison system, recreating code from memory, waiting for just one tiny signal to sneak through. That signal had gone out, and someone on the outside, had answered. Flashback. Internal Federal Cyber Intelligence Unit. 3 years ago, Adrian Voss was once a star, top of the chain, the man called in when the system cracked, and no one knew how to fix it, until he stumbled upon Project Ithaca, buried deep in a redacted server chain it wasn't supposed to exist. Officially, it didn't. But the files were real: video evidence, financial ledgers, internal memos, names. Ithaca wasn't surveillance, it was control. A black-budget initiative led by a coalition of private defense contractors and high-level government officials. The program used AI-driven psychological profiling to manipulate elections, suppress dissident groups, and secretly activate behavioral nudges through media algorithms and smart devices. Mind control, not with chips or drugs, but through data, environment, and repetition. They called it consent manufacturing, and Adrian had uncovered everything. Inti, Blackridge, infirmary, present day. A nurse slipped a photo under Adrian's food tray. No words, just a gesture. Then she walked away quickly, before the cameras could catch her face. Adrian lifted the tray. A picture of a woman, his sister, presumed dead in a car crash 2 years ago. Written on the back, "Still alive. Keep going." He closed his eyes, not from shock, but confirmation. They hadn't just buried the truth, they'd buried people to keep it quiet. That was the cost of knowing too much. Inti, Blackridge, warden's office, Night Warden Graves, stared at a video feed of Adrian pacing calmly in his cell. A red light blinked on his desk, a call from Washington. He didn't answer it. Instead, he looked out the window into the dark, storm-soaked yard. Graves, quietly. "You should have stayed buried, Voss." Interior cell, D9. Adrian sat on the floor, eyes closed, heartbeat steady. The truth wasn't just in his head anymore. Now it was on a hidden drive. Now it had leaked. And now they had a bigger problem than a prisoner. They had a secret slipping into the light, and there was nothing more dangerous than a man they tried to erase, who refused to disappear. Adrian Voss lay motionless on the cold concrete floor, eyes open, watching the ceiling as the flickering light above him danced like a dying star. Days had blurred, weeks had vanished. But tonight, something changed. They had tried everything: sleep deprivation, chemical sedation, sensory torture. But now, they had shifted to something far more permanent: elimination. His last meal had tasted off, bitter, metallic. The nausea had crept in slowly, then the fever, then the silence from the guards who usually grunted at him when pushing the tray through the slot. Adrian wasn't paranoid. They were trying to kill him, quietly, slowly, without a trace. No trial, no witness, just a silent disappearance into the concrete grave of Blackridge. They hadn't anticipated one thing. He'd prepared for this. Flashback: Int Blackridge. Laundry room. 2 months earlier. During his brief transfer to a medical cell, Adrian had memorized the laundry cart schedule. Which guard had shaky hands? Which one left his keyring too low on his belt? Every camera angle, every blind spot. He wasn't just surviving, he was observing. He had used toothpaste and rust to carve a replica of the cell lock from memory, collected fibers from blankets, lint, and thread from his uniform to braid a rope strong enough to lower himself 3 levels. Even used blood from a split lip to smudge patterns across the floor, distracting guards from the actual escape route. Int Blackridge, maintenance tunnel, present night. With his body weakened from poison, he had hours, maybe less. He triggered the emergency drain alarm using a jerry-rigged water short, forcing a minor system reboot. The second the lights blinked, he moved. He slipped through the floor panel behind the toilet, something he'd loosened over the course of 3 weeks using a metal spoon handle hidden under his heel pad. A 2-foot crawl space led to the old service tunnel, sealed after a gas leak incident years ago. They never sealed it well enough for Adrian. Int control room. Same time. Alarms began to ping across multiple blocks. Warden Graves stared at the screen. Guard. Sir, cell D9 is empty. We've got a breach. Graves's face went pale. Graves. Lock down the lower sectors. Cut the power. Now. But it was already too late. Inti, Blackridge sewer line. Minutes later, Adrian staggered through the tunnel, soaked, coughing, bleeding from the ribs where he'd fallen. But his mind was sharp. Every step was calculated. Every breath had purpose. The package, the data drive he'd swallowed days ago, was still inside him. The truth was intact. He wasn't escaping just to survive. He was escaping to expose, to bring down the men who tried to erase him, to burn Ithaca to the ground. XT, Blackridge perimeter, pre-dawn. A guard tower exploded in sparks. A body fell, and from the shadows, a figure vanished into the trees. Adrian Voss was no longer a prisoner. He was a ghost with a plan, and the war had just begun. Adrian Voss stared at the old laptop screen, lit only by the flicker of a dying candle. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but exhaustion, blood loss, and the weight of what he had just done. He'd uploaded everything. The files from Project Ithaca, decrypted and verified, now lived on a dozen mirror sites across the dark web. Names, videos, accounts, conversations, proof beyond denial. The story hit in waves. Secret government program exposed. Evidence suggests AI-based social control experiments. Whistleblower escapes black site prison. News anchors debated ethics. Protesters filled the streets. Congressional hearings were called. CEOs stepped down. An entire system, once hidden in plain sight, was now burning under public scrutiny. Adrian had done what no one else could. He hadn't just escaped the system. He had shattered it. INT, Government Intelligence Command, Washington, D.C. Same time, a round table of officials sat in silence, watching the live stream coverage. No one dared speak first. Finally, a woman in a gray suit leaned forward. Director Rains, activate Contingency Protocol Alpha, full spectrum blackout, and find him. Agent, you mean eliminate? She looked coldly at the screen, a photo of Adrian walking through a crowded street, his hood pulled low. Rains, We erase him. Again. For good this time. Int safe house. Later that night, Adrian packed quickly. No electronics, no fingerprints. He moved like a man who knew every second was borrowed. He looked down at a photograph. His sister, alive, in hiding under a new name. The nurse had been telling the truth. They'd spared her. Barely. But now that the truth was out, no one connected to him was safe. He slipped the photo into his coat and stepped into the cold night, disappearing once again into the shadows. Internal Blackridge. Days later. Warden Graves walked the ruins of the cell block. D9 was a crater. The prison had gone into permanent lockdown. A guard approached, holding a small device. Guard. Found this in the ductwork. Looks like a relay. He used it to bounce a signal. Graves took the device and sighed. Graves. Clever bastard. Then, without another word, he crushed it under his boot. Montage. Worldwide impact. Senators arrested. A journalist opens a package with hard drives. Anonymous hackers spread the files. Millions march in cities, holding signs that read, "We know." A child scrolls past the news on a phone and looks directly into the camera. EXT, remote village, mountains, unknown country. 6 months later, Adrian Voss sat at a quiet cafe sipping tea. A radio buzzed in the background with yet another update on the ongoing investigations. He didn't smile, he didn't relax, he simply watched. A man at the next table coughed twice, a subtle signal. Adrian didn't turn. He already knew. They had found him again. But this time, he wasn't running. This time, he had a network. They tried to erase him. Twice. Now he was everywhere, and the game had only just begun.